but I turned it down. They were so very anxious to get cracking and do something.
Some feel, General Roberts, that your career, to all intents and purposes, ended that day off Dieppe. Is this too extreme a judgment?
No, my active career was certainly finished. But I was really heartbroken that I couldn't command that grand division and first-class men in its later battles in Northwest Europe.
The rest of your wartime assignment was in England?
In England, commanding the Canadian reinforcement units.
Was this, in effect, a kick downstairs because of Dieppe?
Well, it was, I suppose. Anyway, it wasn't an active command. And, but it was an important one at the time because we needed all those reinforcements for D-Day. And just before D-Day, I think I had 100,000 odd men under command in Canadian reinforcement units.
But did you feel then, do you feel now that because of Dieppe you never were given a chance to?
Well, I presume that was largely the reason.
Who would make this decision, sir?
General Creer, I suppose. He was the corps commander.
But I deny that he would have made the scapegoat for Dieppe. Definitely. There may have been other reasons, but I won't go into them. But he wasn't made the scapegoat.
Do you feel in any way bitter, General Roberts, about the treatment you received after Dieppe?
Not now.
Earlier you did.
Earlier I did feel a bit bitter, yes.
You felt, in other words, that you had been made the scapegoat?
Well, it's a strong word, but perhaps that is the way I did feel.
Well, I suppose it's a tactical defeat, but perhaps a spiritual victory.
Well, it was a disaster that day. You call it that. I couldn't write it that day, call it a disaster, because for reasons I was writing through censorship. But I knew in my heart then it was, and most people who were there could see it was a complete disaster.
Simplicity, good communications, a clear-cut organization for command and control, and experienced commanders and troops. Vital. All of those were absent.
Personally, I think that if you don't know how to swim, the quickest way to learn how to do it is just to happen to fall in deep water, and then you have to fight for your life. So there was something along that line, I think, in the case of Dieppe.
We were sent into the raid, in my opinion, largely to prove to our own people, the Americans and the Russians, that a second front just wasn't on. And we proved it. And I think that when you consider the magnitude of the war and the casualties that resulted from the war, the loss of a couple of brigades, looking at it from the standpoint of Churchill or Roosevelt or Stalin, was pretty small. Now, if you're one of the people concerned, it looms pretty big. But when you're thinking in terms of a global war, it's not very big.
Compromise on this, compromise on the bombing, compromise on everything. No good.
It was an experiment, I suppose. But it was very well worthwhile. We had many successful similar operations later, and I doubt if they would have been so successful had it not been for the lessons learned at Dieppe.
The old Duke of Wellington has been credited with the saying that the Battle of Waterloo was won on the playing fields of Eton. I am quite sure that the Battle of Normandy was won on the beaches of Dieppe. For every one man who died at Dieppe, at least 10 or more were spared in the invasion of Normandy 2 years later.
The lessons learned at Dieppe were very valuable, but I think they could have been learned without the loss of those splendid soldiers.
Dieppe told people what not to do.
I think that's essentially true. And what it told them not to do was to attempt an operation with inadequate fire support. We went in at Dieppe against a very strong position with nothing stronger than 4-inch guns and Boston bombers to support us. And that turned out to be nonsense. And the result was that in the Normandy operation in June 1944, we went in with battleships and cruisers and the RAF Bomber Command and the United States bombers and everything we could raise. It was an utterly different conception. And that time, of course, it worked.
Since we couldn't capture a defended port in a workable state by direct assault, and since we couldn't hope to get one by an encircling movement in the requisite time, and since we couldn't maintain ourselves off the coast of France without the shelter and facilities of a port, we came to the conclusion that we must bring our own port with us from England. Now, I cannot claim that this derived directly from the Dieppe operation, but the germ of the idea was undoubtedly born at Dieppe, and it was Captain Hughes Harriet himself who put up the idea. And from the germ of this idea in the Combined Operations Command, there grew the great prefabricated mobile harbors, Mulberry, without which the invasion of 1944 could never have taken place.
The Germans, on the other hand, learned a false lesson from Dieppe. They were convinced as a result of Dieppe that an invasion could be held on the beaches, and it led them, it confirmed them in what was really a fatal policy, the policy of what they call the West Wall, of instead of having their troops back, ready to come down to a point where the landing took place, they had the whole of their army, as it were, disposed along the coastline, with the result that once you broke through that, the invasion was off to a pretty good start.
I consider, of course, that responsibility for the reverse and for the casualties must rest wholly with us British. We are responsible. When the job was given to the GHQ Home Forces, they should never have allowed inexperienced troops to take it on. When the buck was passed to me, I should have been more emphatic. I did protest verbally. I think I should have protested vehemently and in writing that you mustn't do it with these troops. Well, I didn't. So I suppose I must bear certain responsibilities because I didn't do it.
Did you ever hear General Roberts say at any briefing that Dieppe would be a piece of cake?
No, I certainly didn't. I've heard that story, but it'll get no credence from me.
Yes, I recall this quite well. There was a conference of all of the officers in the division at divisional headquarters. At that time, General Roberts gave us a general briefing and told us for the first time where we were going. And at that time, as he outlined the thing, he said, "I think this is going to be a piece of cake."
Some officer did remark as we were leaving, "This is going to be a piece of cake." But it wasn't the general himself. I do not think so.
It was certainly the impression that the general gave, but whether I ever heard him use those words or not, I couldn't honestly tell you.
Well, I deny ever using that expression at all. No. And had I thought it was going to be easy, which I did not, I wouldn't have used that expression. I'd have used a Canadian expression.
A cinch.
Such as, it'll be a pushover, or a cinch, something like that.
Apparently someone at the final briefing said it'll be a piece of cake, and this has been attributed to you in the telling and retelling.
It seems that way. It was a Monty expression, not one that I would use. Monty used it many times, I know.
It's an expression I use, piece of cake. I know what it means. I mean, it means it's just easy. Never. Not me.
I heard afterwards in prison camps that some officers had accused him, if you can use the word accused, of saying such a thing.
but I never heard him say so myself.
And somebody, whether officers or other ranks, I don't know, sent him a piece of cake.
Yes, I heard that, too. They were sent by some officers in the prison camp in which I was living at the time.
Certainly not with your blessing.
No, I never. Oh, we never heard about it till afterwards.
And actually, I thought it was a piece of old brown bread, sort of showing me what rations that they'd had while they were in captivity.
I see.
I didn't think it was a piece of cake at all. It was a dried up
black bread. Or
black bread. Mm.
How does a man feel when he gets a thing like this and knows the thinking that that lies behind the sending of the black bread in the mail?
Well, you don't like it, certainly.
General Roberts was a magnificent leader and obviously a tremendously brave soldier with 3 rows of gallantry awards on his tunic. I thought at the time that he was too damn brave, and it's the cunning ones who come last who usually survive. There was certainly no sense of it being a piece of cake. I think with respect the Canadians were overbold. It's a very good fault. If you're not brave, you never get anywhere. Equally, you've got to be cunning. And there wasn't much cunning at Dieppe. It was a head-on collision with armor not ever being able to take on reinforced concrete. It was a reconnaissance in force, a big probe in a very bad place.
The thing that will be recalled for all time to come about Dieppe is the gallantry of the men and the gallantry of the fellows who led them in the field. Now, don't think we don't deplore the loss of those people. Any loss is hard. But it wasn't in vain.
It lasted 9 hours, the Battle of Dieppe. The controversy has lasted thus far 20 years and 21 days. Frank Willis, good night.